Welcome to the mobile track, the second part of the track. We're about to close the doors, so return your seat backs and tables raised to the upright position. If you want to be someplace other than the mobile track, now would be your opportunity. I want to introduce Bjorn Hjelm, who's my co-chair in the Moderna working group, the OpenID Foundation working group, where we're doing the profiles for Mobile Connect, and today he's going to talk to us a bit about the relationship between FIDO and Mobile Connect. Bjorn.
Here we go. Do the catch-up phrase. Can you guys hear me now? So I'm Bjorn with Verizon. I work in our corporate technology organization. I've been active in both the GSMA Mobile Connect development as well as the OpenID Foundation Moderna working group, as John mentioned. So the way they work together is the Moderna working group's developing some of the OpenID Connect specifications that Mobile Connect relies on. I'm also active in the FIDO Alliance. Verizon, we just completed a pilot with 4 of the other operators. It's going to be the presentation after this, where one of the authenticators that we used was FIDO. So Verizon has seen a lot of value in FIDO as an authenticator. And part of our participation is FIDO is how to marry Mobile Connect and FIDO. And so that is what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to sequence this through why, what, and how we're doing it. I'm keeping it at a higher level, and then there will be plenty of room to ask questions about Mobile Connect, FIDO, or how they're working together. So why? So FIDO and Alliance and GSMA has been communicating for a while, and in May of 2017, they signed a liaison relationship to interact on this topic. So the objective of establishing a formal relationship between the organization was to, in fact, that the objects align where Mobile Connect and FIDO is trying to solve. So the problem for easier and safer authentication, leverage the mobile phone as your authenticator or your token, however you want to talk, and using secure 2-factor authentication. With this also to create a pluggable framework to support a variety of security levels as well as authentication models. So Mobile Connect defines a framework where you can actually have multiple authenticators. So FIDO being one. And the reason for this was to promote the adoption of FIDO within the Mobile Connect community. So I mentioned that there are complementary. So for those people who have seen a FIDO presentation or are involved in the FIDO Alliance are probably very familiar with this triangle. So FIDO addresses the authentication. Where Mobile Connect comes in is everything from doing the federation, using OpenID Connect, using user management. So what the mobile network operator knows about the users, how they manage them, comes into play for when you select different signals or factors, depending on level of assurance to authenticate the user or the authentication request. And also having the interaction with the user, whether it's point of sale or other interactions. So what are we doing? So this effort between FIDO and GSMA was to highlight the synergies between Mobile Connect and FIDO, along with how these technologies can be complementary. So I just show you the triangle. So Mobile Connect is a module design that, again, support a range of different authenticators. Again, some of it is depending on the level of assurance, but also the use case. The effort was also to demonstrate that FIDO can be integrated to Mobile Connect. So in a FIDO model, you just do an authentication. And so the definition of an RP in a FIDO term is a little bit different than what it is in a Mobile Connect term. So demonstrating this is to highlight how these would work together as opposed to how you just take one in a silo. And the focus was initially on the UIF specification. And so for those who's familiar with FIDO, there are multiple specifications for how you can support FIDO. UIF is one, U2F is another, and then most recently is FIDO 2. And so the intent of this work is to, once UIF has been specified, or how UIF and Mobile Connect could be work together, it was to address how you would do this with FIDO 2. But today we're going to focus on, when we say FIDO in this presentation, it means UIF. So everybody likes pictures. So as I said, Mobile Connect is a modular framework. So the user makes a request or a service, try to access a SP's site, whether that is through their mobile device or through a PC. How this works is you type in your phone number. Then through a lookup service, the service provider gets a redirect URI that is sent down to the mobile network operator who owns that user. The authenticator will then select the authenticator, appropriate one. In this case, it will be FIDO. And then the authentication server, the FIDO server, would perform the authentication with a client on the device, respond back to the authenticate gateway that would then respond with the authorization code, and then the service provider will then use that authorization code to get an ID token. And that is, in essence, how the flow works. Use cases could be you checking out your shopping bag in an online retailer. You're doing a step-up authentication for you need to authorize an amount that you for the purchase. You are giving someone access to your research server, different use cases. And then the how. So we use the Mobile Connect framework to do the federation of the FIDO authentication. So I mentioned the Mobile Connect relies on OpenID Connect. So Mobile Connect has specified a profile of OpenID Connect to be used for Mobile Connect. Some of those includes specific claims and scopes values for the type of services that Mobile Connect has specified. So you can view Mobile Connect as an implementation of OpenID Connect. And they use a set of different services, whether that's authentication, authorization, KYC matching, or attribute matching, or verification, or matching or exchange. And so all those have specific claims and scopes values that is not part of OpenID Connect, but on top of it. As I said, this work that Mobile Connect relies on in terms of OpenID Connect is supported by the Moderna working group. And so in that working group, we have specified the client registration using a software statement, there's discovery methods, and the authentication profile. The other aspect is to create a FIDO authenticator policy. So what that means is that you specify a minimum set per level of assurance for the authenticator, for the FIDO authenticator. So you will specify for LOA2, LOA3, and LOA4 different requirements that will be used when you do when the client on the device does a discovery of what FIDO authenticator is available. It will also use this FIDO profile to identify which one is the most appropriate one. and that is included in the flow from the identity gateway back to the mobile client for once the FIDO authenticator has been selected as an authenticator. And then the authentication context. So we defined a set of FIDO profiles per level of assurance. Similarly, as part of the federation, there's requirements specified for the different assurance level, defining what is required. That feeds into the authenticator policy. And also, Mobile Connect specifies you are required to use the ACR as well as the AMR value as part of your authentication request from the RP to the OP. These are the key items of what we've done in terms of matching the FIDO with Mobile Connect for how they would work together. And I included some resources for people not familiar with the FIDO Alliance, so you can download the specifications that have been released. I said this work is going to be a white paper, and so FIDO has a place for where you can find all the white papers that have been published. If you want to know more about Mobile Connect, I included a hyperlink for that, as well as the OpenID Foundation working group. So I mentioned the Moderna working group. There is also some applicable work in the Connect as well as the EAP working group that applies to FIDO. So that is what I had in my presentation. Questions?
So we can do questions. I'm going to ask the first one, which is the one you know I'm going to have to ask. Bjorn, can you contrast the security properties of FIDO implemented in the back channel in the way that you've described here versus FIDO implemented over the access channel, and in particular, the difference in the resistance to phishing?
Thanks, John. So I don't think we have addressed the back channel for this implementation. So,
well, but you're doing FIDO over the back channel, not the access channel in that implementation.
So when I say back channel, you mean the client-initiated back channel, or?
No, in
so
the back, the mobile to server channel as opposed to the access device to relying party.
Okay, so again, what the complicated use cases becomes when your consumption device and your authentication device are different. And so one proposal that we have is that you use either a vendor ID or an AID to an authentication ID to tie the consumption device to the authentication device. It's easier to do when you have that you do the consumption and the authentication device is one and the same. So the problem with the consumption and the authentication device being different is that the proposals on the table to tie them is not very scalable. So it is not a perfect solution.
Hey everyone, this is Mike Schwartz from Glue. So I just want to jump in and to Bjorn's defense of what a great idea I think this is, using even given that maybe you're losing the benefit of man-in-the-middle protection when you're using a back channel versus the access channel. The idea that we're using FIDO instead of just the SIM card as the authentication, it mitigates a lot of risk and really makes the solution a lot more secure. So I think sometimes security is not about protection, but mitigating additional risks. And so I think this is a really great idea to marry these two things together. And it's not maybe as good as, so you're not protecting the access channel, but it's better than it's really a huge step up over just trusting the SIM card.
Other questions?
What are the timelines you expect for this work, and how does it relate to what's the migration path for the existing Mobile Connect implementations and protocol?
In terms of roadmap for rollout of Mobile Connect, or for how MNOs are deploying FIDO and Mobile Connect?
Yeah, so specifically here around the FIDO work, that was the first part of the question. What do you expect?
So, so I think Telefonica is probably the leading MNO who's deploying both Mobile Connect and FIDO. In Europe, the default is using a SIM application. I think Telefonica is pursuing using FIDO instead. I think Orange is slightly behind. In the US, T-Mobile has already deployed FIDO. Verizon is in the process of deploying FIDO. We're not going to be 100% Mobile Connect compliant. It is not a technical issue. But the purpose of this work was to better specify how these can work together so you don't have customized implementation. So the initial Telefonica implementation was very customized to their implementation, and it's very costly to do it that way. So part of this is to create an implementation guide for how you would marry these together to drive other MNOs to deploy the same configuration to ensure that both network and the server side and the device side are working better together based on how you combine FIDO and Mobile Connect. I don't have a specific timeline for each, but they're going in different paths, and some of them, the early ones, are more customized in terms of how they solve this marriage and how the identity gateway talks to the FIDO server. So in Mobile Connect, they specify the identity gateway, but they don't. They just have adapters for the different authenticators because they're all relied on different standards, whether that is an ETSI standard or a 3GPP standard or FIDO. And I think that the point of having FIDO is, the beauty of FIDO is that the private key doesn't matter what it is. It can be biometrics, it could be a PIN, it could be whatever the user wants it to be. It was one of the things that appealed to us in terms of the flexibility of FIDO, and also the only standard we could identify that were mature that would support biometrics in a standardized way.
So Bjorn, when the app is installed, how is the app actually bound to the identity or the MISDN or the identity of the user? There must be some sort of registration process.
You mean in terms of the enrollment process?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So usually the user would, so there's an identity proofing part of this, and then there's the onboarding of your mobile device. And so the intent is to have let's call it Mobile Connect client that then interacts, that has a FIDO SDK, depending on who your vendor is, to create this marriage between FIDO and Mobile Connect. Your sign-up process would be that when you enroll your FIDO key, you've already signed up for a Mobile Connect account. And then, again, part of the client development is somewhat unique to each of the operators. But I don't know if that answers your question.
Given NIST's recommendations about SMS and other large organizations, and a very good talk about SMS security yesterday by somebody in this room, how do you square the security aspect of using SMS for the delivery or for getting onto the network?
Not quite sure I understand the question. In what context are you?
Well, when you log in, an SMS is sent to your phone, and you click to actually get on, say, a wireless network or something, right? Isn't that the way it works?
It doesn't have to be. You can use 2D barcodes to enroll the user, and in the barcode you have...
No, not for the enrollment, for the actual access, I mean.
Access...
So if you hit a captive portal and you click on the Mobile Connect logo, put in your phone number, and then it sends you an SMS with a URI? Isn't that what?
Well, that's one way to onboard it. Again, there's no standardized way how you onboard a user. You could require them to, depending on what LOA you want them to be able to access, there will be different ways for how you onboard a customer.
So I think if I understand your question, some of the original implementations by some of the carriers are using a really bad authentication system involving sending an SMS with a link that you click on. I think that Bjorn's presentation about using FIDO is intended to replace that via a network-based push notification along with cryptographic signatures as opposed to using SMS. So this doesn't necessarily solve the account porting issues, but it does solve a bunch of the other issues. And there are other things in Mobile Connect that we're looking at to attempt to address some, or at least slow down some of the rampant fraud on account porting.
Yeah, the intent is not to use SMS OTP. So, again, there's different ways for how you using the user to scan a barcode to initiate the flow, etc. And there's certain things that we know as a mobile network operators of the user and the device they use. We also use EPKA as part of the authentication of the device, and so we could leverage some of that as part of the onboarding.
So how can Mobile Connect solution be applied to enterprise users with enterprise governance and policy?
So the question is, how would you use Mobile Connect in an enterprise scenario where you have specific enterprise policy rules? So the policies are enforced per SP on the identity gateway. So let's assume that we're living, the assumption is here is an individualized world that you have a dedicated session running for this enterprise customer. So you would just use the policy engine on the ID gateway to enforce whatever those policies would be, whether those are wherever you can access, what you can access, etc. So again, the policy engine on the identity gateway is very flexible. And then how I would deploy it, I would have a dedicated instant in my on my platform for that enterprise, and I would apply the policy specific to that, so it wouldn't confluence with anything else. It kind of depends too if you're assuming that the user also have a time frame outside of work where they use the same device and same authentication. That's possible too.
So I do know that, at least in France, Orange is working on some of those enterprise scenarios. In principle, since Mobile Connect is a standardized OpenID Connect platform, if you were, say, using Ping Federate as your identity platform, you can chain that to using OpenID Connect to the operators to act as the authenticator as another plug-in method of authentication. So you could use an authentication adapter on your Ping Fed server and allow people to, as an option, use Mobile Connect.
About the registration of
So depending upon the operator, they also have ways of binding the MISDN, so you may have a process of sending the MISDN to the operator, or there are ways of doing account binding, but those are more advanced services that some of the MNOs are offering and others aren't yet.
Great presentation. As I think about the mobile phone as a true authenticator to possibly replace having a hard token, what kind of goes in my mind is how can we, well, what sort of protections do we have on the mobile device itself to protect that crypto private key to eventually, be on par with what a YubiKey would present, in a CTAP type scenario where you want to, use it for, assurance level 2 type access.
That's an excellent question. So what I failed to mention when you define the FIDO authenticator policy for the different level of assurance, part of that input is also the security levels that FIDO requires for the different level of assurance. So FIDO has a certification program that has a companion document in terms of security requirements per the different level of assurance. And so that also includes how you secure the hardware where the private key is stored. So this is independent on Mobile Connect and totally specific to FIDO. So whether it's FIDO2, U2F, or UIF, they're the same security requirements and certification required for it. And so part of that, when you map the policy, is also the input of the security requirements that that FIDO authenticator has to be certified to in order to live up to the level of assurance.
Hi, good morning. My name is Nitin. I work for Mobile Iron. We're a mobile device management, mobile security company, as many of you might know. And I have a similar question along the lines in the context of enterprise. And the way we see it is, first of all, the enterprise mobile distribution is largely dominated by iOS and then Android a little bit. But for us, the device registration provides the strong mechanism for onboarding any given user, at which point we have a user identity, right? What I'm not getting is sort of how, again, would the device onboarding process here be tied to the device that then gives you a guarantee that indeed it is the user that you had, enterprise user that you had onboarded. Now I understand behind the scenes the carriers are kind of working on infrastructure, but I still don't see the connection.
So is the question, how do you onboard a user and know that that's the same user, or that what device they're using, or?
Yeah, so to take the example of YubiKey, the workflow is fairly straightforward. When you onboard a user, the user has a key. From that point onwards, the key is either connected to the laptop or such, right? How is a similar workflow when there is potentially no device registration or such?
So I'll speak for Verizon. I can't speak for other mobile network operators, but we have one approach for Android, another one for an iPhone. So as part of your registration flow, we will use a device ID that we get from the Android API. It is not DMEI. And that's how we tie the device to the private key. It is not an authenticator. It is just a reference point for what device you generate the private key from. And in iOS, depending on who your vendor is, you may do it differently, but one way is to generate a unique key specific for that device, and that's what you include as a part of the registration flow. If you want to, you can also include your device authentication in the authentication flow. So FIDO allows you to have vendor-specific attributes that you include in the authentication process. So that's another way to do device authentication and FIDO authentication as part of the overall FIDO authentication. So there's different mechanisms you can use to tie the device to the private key. But in general, if you rely on the certification and that the private key is securely stored, I don't see a reason that you need to bother about what the device is, as opposed to just knowing that each private key is unique and from that device, and that's all you need. If you want to have a specific device, there's options that you can use, whether you want to include it as part of the authentication flow or just as a registration.
So I think it's important to remember that Mobile Connect is an OpenID Connect federation protocol, and that the key material, et cetera, is exchanged between when using FIDO, is exchanged between the device and the MNO, and whatever account binding is that's done between an enterprise and the federation server is probably based on the phone number. So some method of making sure that the right phone number is actually being validated. There are attributes that would go back in the federation operation which would tell you how secure the key is. I don't know that Mobile Connect is necessarily going to be able to replace all the use cases of having a registered device.
Agreed.
You know, there will be some interesting mixing and matching. It also has different security properties in that the phishability is different between having the keys exchanged in the access channel or in a different channel. So using FIDO directly for an enterprise, using mutual TLS and certificates provisioned through an EMM and Mobile Connect will all have different sort of sweet spot and maybe combined in an enterprise. Thank you, Bjorn. We'll have to move on to our panel.
Okay, thank you.